Thank you, Naomi, for that great introduction, and thank you also for the invitation to speak here tonight and for hosting us in this very beautiful venue here. At the University of Sydney, I'm also the director of the Design Lab, and that's a research group that focuses on design, and a lot of the research is in design, in the area of design, is coming out of that group. Specifically, we've got 3 core areas in that research group, which are interaction design, creative technology, and design innovation. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit also about sort of the research dissemination that happens in our group. And we, of course, publish a lot of papers as academics, but we're also trying to make our research accessible to the wider public. And one of the ways we're doing that is through writing books. And those are 2 books that I've been involved in over the past few years. They were both published last year. So the one on your left is a book about design methods that we wrote together with some of my colleagues in the Design Lab, and it captures design methods that we use to teach design at the University of Sydney, and also methods that we use in our research as well. And the book on your right is a book that is based on 10 years of my own research, which is focusing on bringing user experience design and human-centered design thinking to cities, and especially smart cities. Especially the book on the left has been doing very well. So we actually, it seems like we have actually found a gap in the market. We really wrote this as a way to help us teach more students in design and to have a common vocabulary and collection of methods so we can use in our teaching and research. But it's, our publisher has contacted us recently that they had to do a reprint because they have already sold over 2,000 copies, which was very exciting for us as academics. It's usually not that many people reading our research. So I wanted to start talking a little bit about the evolution of design, and so how we sort of got here, and why we're talking about design in this particular context and event tonight. And I think Steve Jobs' quote captures this really well. He said that most people make the mistake of thinking design is what it looks like. But that's not what we think design is. It's not just what it looks like and feels like, but design is how it works. And I think that also describes how often still people misperceive what design is about. And it's also really nicely linked actually to the evolution of design according to those 4 different layers or levels of design. Where at the beginning, about 100 years ago or so, designers were working with engineers to achieve better construction. And then on the second level, that's what Steve Jobs is referring to as what things look like, where it's about the visual appearance, and we're using graphic design to achieve better visual appearances. And then the end of Steve Jobs' quote is around how things work and how we can make things work better by focusing on user experience design and usability. And so that's the 3rd level of design. And all these levels of design have been used over the last 100 years by businesses and in the industry to achieve a strategic advantage in the market and to be able to provide better products, better designed services and systems, and to achieve better outcomes. Now, what we've been seeing though in the last 10 years or so is that design is changing again, or the role of design is changing again. And it's now increasingly used as a way of thinking and to solve complex problems. And often that also includes understanding whether whether the problem we're trying to address is actually the right problem to address. It's also used to address what we refer to as wicked problems. And interestingly, wicked problems can't really be solved. It's one of the characteristics of wicked problems. There's no solution to wicked problem, but we can address them. And that's increasingly important because of these increasing challenges that we face as a world. Now, wicked problems are best demonstrated maybe through transport in cities. And this is a photo I took in Vienna, one of my other brothers on a shared bike in Vienna. And when we're trying to optimize, say, the experience of cyclists, we have to also consider the other stakeholders in a city scenario or context. And by maximizing the experience for cyclists, for example, we possibly create other problems for other stakeholders in that environment. So design thinking can be used to consider all of those concerns and considerations and needs of all the stakeholders and trying to find a solution that works for everyone, that offers us the best possible solution to implement. It's also increasingly important because it's not just that we are facing more complex problems, but we also faced with more complex technologies or technological advancements, which have been coined by the World Economic Forum as the cyber-physical systems. So that's including things like robotics and AI. And in design, we often say that in order to achieve innovation, in order to achieve an innovative outcome, we have to consider all of these three things that you can see in this diagram. If you're only addressing one or two, you're not going to be successful with the product or system or service you're designing or trying to design for. Now, a number of scholars have recently started to argue, though, that maybe it's not just about maximizing the human needs and the human concerns, but we also need to think about the ethical impacts and implications of what we do, and also to consider the impact of what we do on the environment and on the health of our planet as well. And design thinking is a popular tool and a popular way of thinking to address these sort of wicked problems and challenges, because it allows us to deal with complexity. It gives us the tools to deal with complexity. And quite importantly, also because as humans we feel we don't want to be in a situation where that is complex and that is ambiguous and we don't actually know where we're going. But design thinking, and by practicing design, it actually gives us an attitude to be comfortable with uncertainty for long enough so that we can explore the different aspects of a problem area, and that way we can actually come up with a better solution. Now, the way we teach design in our university, we're using this process and this terminology, and we're summarizing that with this very simple process diagram and the terminology of designing through thinking, making, breaking, and repeating. And that's also the title of our design methods book that we published last year. And we published this very much out of this spirit and idea of the fact that you don't have to be a designer to think like one. And that design as a way of thinking is actually beneficial to any type of work or discipline. The book includes 60 methods, 60 design methods, short descriptions along with exercises. And we've also published templates under Creative Commons license on our book website, which is designthinkmakebreakrepeat.com. Now, this is about a one-slide summary of my other book, Making Cities Smarter. And I wanted to show this because one of the things that I argue for in the book and talking about smart cities and the user experience in smart cities is that we need to think in prototypes. So in order to achieve our strategic goals in cities like efficient infrastructure, livable environments, and sustainable futures, we need to continue improving the applications we deploy in cities. And I've visualized it through this process diagram that is a never-ending spiral of improvement and change. I wanted to also mention that we've published last year a MOOC, so that's a massive open online learning course, a free online course that is runs for 5 weeks, and I think it starts about every 2 months or so. You can find it on that link. It's hosted on Coursera.org and also features a number of case studies with 3 companies that operate in Sydney and in Australia and also across the world. Thank you.
So we're just before 7, so I have so many questions that we're going to get into with Martin. He's just returned from Cambridge University where he was teaching, talking about innovation ecosystems. Tell us about the work that you were doing and about the project.
Yes, it's a new initiative of the university where we are focusing on innovation and entrepreneurship projects with students and working also with industry and community organizations as well. And so with this particular unit, we had a group of 22 students. We gave them an intensive crash course in design innovation and design thinking here in Sydney. And we took them to Cambridge University, where they had another week of intensive training in leadership and innovation specifically, and also focused on personal development as well.
And we'll talk about that because this was at the Moller Centre, which is part of the Churchill campus, so from Winston Churchill, and it's a famous school which is all about kind of the best in terms of leadership. And you did some, they had a paradigm for their leadership testing. So tell us about how, I guess, the brightest universities are thinking about leadership and categorising people in a workplace.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. They essentially started off that week of teaching the students by getting them all to think about their particular personality type. The test they're using is known as the Merrill-Wilson test, so the number of tests. But that's the one they were using, and it's I think, a very effective test because it's quite simple. And essentially, there are 4 character types, and you answer a questionnaire with a number of characteristics that describe yourself, and then you just count up how many you have in each of the categories, and that's how you know which type you are. And so the types are the amiables, the expressives, the drivers, and the analyticals. And it was really interesting how, as students did that, and because the students were working on the group project, they were really I think there was really a moment for them where they realized, oh, that's why we're not working well together. Or maybe that's why we're getting better along with, why I'm getting better along with some people in the class than others. And there's also a lot of theory around how these different types work well in specific situations or not, or less well in specific situations, and also how the different types have different leadership styles, for example, as well. So whether you're leading from the back or from the front. And it's all about having, of course, the right balance, and importantly about understanding who you're working with and what drives them. Yeah. And I think one of the really interesting things, that a very simple quote that I took away, is what the facilitator was telling the students was that you shouldn't treat people the way that you want to be treated yourself, but you should treat them the way they want to be treated. Yeah. And so it's this realization that not everyone is like you, and the character types, I think, are a great, very simple way of realizing that. Yeah.
And you can do those tests online. I had a go, which was it was different to what I thought it would be. But I think it's interesting that that's the personality choice that they've looked at. But it highlights that in a workplace that we're all expected to be more collaborative, and yet there's different personalities at play. So we were talking about maybe an engineer versus someone with design thinking. And you, Martin's just taken on a role as academic lead for the university's innovation and entrepreneurship program. So it's all about how do you want to equip these graduates to kind of go out into the world. How do we get these different faculties to work together in different brains and leadership styles?
Very good question. So it's actually building on a work that the university started last year. So last year, university launched a new undergraduate curriculum where there are a number of generalist degrees, and students can do a first and a second major in a completely different area. And along with that curriculum development, they were developing also, working on a set of new graduate qualities that all of our students should develop through their university training. And so the 9 graduate qualities, and there is disciplinary expertise in there, but there also all the other skills are really more what we probably refer to as broad skills. So there's complex problem solving or cultural competence, communication skills. And that's based on interviews with people in industry and asking people in industry what skills they're seeking in graduates.
And so it's almost as though it's not just capabilities, but it's character in the workplace. And can you talk to us about the I and the T learning styles? Yeah,
so I don't know if people here are familiar with that idea of having I and T type skills or graduates. And so in the past, I think what happened was that we were mostly training our graduates to be experts in a particular discipline. And so that's the I model. They have a very deep disciplinary expertise. But I guess the complexity of the workforce is increasingly requiring us to have also these very broad skills that are reflected in the graduate qualities that our university is developing now. And that's the T in the T profile of our graduates, or in terms of the T-shaped skills. And so that the T captures this idea of having a broad set of skills that allow you to better collaborate, to better work with people from other disciplines, and to better understand people from other disciplines. And one of the most important things, and it's also something that is very fundamental, extremely fundamental in design, is empathy. So being able to put yourself into someone else's shoes. And so often these skills are also referred to as soft skills, but actually our university it rather prefers to talk about them as being new core skills, because they're actually really, really important in the future in future careers.
Yeah,
really.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that also speaks to the idea of lifelong learning, and just again that we have 7 careers is what they're saying now going forward. So it's definitely, this is something that we'll cover later in the year as well. I also suggested that we needed the letter O to kind of be the facilitator of these different people. So if that gets published, it was me that said that. Now I want to just ask one last question before I throw it open and invite our guests back. So you have done a lot of research on smart cities and precincts, and a lot of it's using technology in ways to kind of individualise the experience. How can you apply that to a workplace? This is purely theoretical as well.
It's all about the process. So there isn't a solution that you can just plug and play, and that's the same in smart cities, and that's where often smart cities went wrong. A solution that works in one part of the world doesn't work in another part of the world, because you have to understand the local and individual context. And so it's all about using the methods that we're also describing in our books and in our research to understand the particular work environment, and to understand people's needs and desires, and then understanding how they can be addressed. Yeah. And there might be a technology involved in the solution, but we're not starting with that technology. We're starting with an understanding of people's needs.